was definitely my fault. Um, Very rarely is it my
Yeah,
fault.
usually I'm late. Today I was early.
No, it was 4 o'clock, and I was like, well, I'll do some back end website stuff, and then I was updating all of the plugins, doing everything, just so that everything is secure, and then all of a sudden our main website concealedcarryforfree.com is like, there's a critical error, and I fucking I knew it. I fucking knew exactly kind of where to start looking. So I tried a few things, didn't work. I was like, I have to restore this bitch. So luckily I had a backup from yesterday. So if you did anything on the website yesterday, you're gonna have to go redo it, dude.
Does that include any registrations?
Any registrations?
Well, they should know where to show up.
Yeah, hopefully.
All right. Welcome to the podcast. I am Isaac Chase.
And I am me all the time. Edgar Antillon.
Captain website.
Captain fucking website.
All right. So, what did you have anything that you wanted to talk about tonight?
No, I don't have a motherfucking thing to discuss, to talk about. I think the picture that I put up there,
mm-hmm.
I do it just because algorithms and people, mm-hmm. It's clickbaity, I must admit. But I think that's a good topic for me. I don't know.
Well, actually, what I wanted to talk about, I think, lines up perfectly with that.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
So I should have warned you ahead of time, but do you have that YouTube video of that officer-involved shooting that I sent you the other night?
Did you email it to me?
I believe that I did email it to you. Wait, let me check.
Oh, yeah. I don't think that was an email, though. I think that was a text.
I think it was a text. Yep, it was text.
Yeah, so I do not. Where could I get it, though?
If you just go to YouTube and type in Jacksonville officer opens fire.
Okay.
So for those of you who don't watch YouTube, there is a mountain of police shootings that have been released over the course of the last 4 years. I think it had something to do with George Floyd and all these departments deciding to be more transparent and releasing more police shootings closer to the date of the shooting. And there's a couple of YouTube channels that have picked up on this, and Police Activity is one of them. And they probably have a new video maybe twice a day of police shootings.
So you're going to have to tell me if you hear it or not.
Okay.
That's one thing I hate about this platform is I like it overall, except this has been one of my kind of issues where it doesn't give you guys the audio.
It's not critical that I hear the audio, but obviously it would be for the audience.
If you can't hear it, they probably can't hear it.
Okay, I can hear it.
You can hear it?
Yeah. All right, so let me set the scene for anybody. If you're just listening, this will still have the same impact on you. Police officers responding to a report of a man with a gun, waving it around, threatening people. And he finds the guy walking, looks like around the back of a gas station. And as he's driving up, he starts addressing the guy, yelling at him, commands. And the guy initially sort of complies, but then turns his back to the officer. And I think he pulls out his gun and starts running, and you're going to hear how the officer responds to that stimulus.
All right. Doo-doo. No. You want me to fast forward it, or?
You can go to like 15 seconds, maybe.
Yeah, not even worth it.
I'm already there.
Hey, go ahead and pop them hands up for me. Put your hands up. Turn around. Turn around. Turn your ass the fuck away from me. Back up towards me. Hey, asshole, get your fucking hands up before I shoot your ass. Hey, bitch. Pow, pow, pow. Gun.
All right. So hopefully you guys heard that. He yelled.
You want me to do it
"Hey."
again?
Yeah, go back to like about 30 seconds, I think. Or no, right there. Right there's good. Yeah.
Fucking hands up before I shoot your ass. Hey, bitch. Pow, pow, pow. Gun.
Oh, you can read it too. It's down at the bottom.
Yeah.
The caption says it. Pow, pow, pow.
Pow, pow, pow. Now, there's no way to know for certain why he said that. But why do you think maybe he yelled pow, pow, pow before he yelled gun, gun, gun?
Well, the obvious one is training. So
And
that's
what kind of training?
usually it's simulated training,
Scenario based,
scenario-based,
Yeah.
simulated type. We're not using real guns. We're setting up a safe little padded area, and we're using our fingers. Even
or like a blue gun or something.
or a blue gun. And I'll be honest with you, like I'm getting out of the habit of doing this, but I use a laser gun in the class just so people can see bullshit.
Mhm.
And I've caught myself saying pew pew just as special effects.
Mhm.
And I've thought about this even before you sent me this video. Yeah, that is just like I probably should stop fucking doing that. That's not a good thing to have in your repertoire.
Repertoire. Yeah, so this is a complicated issue because the brain does weird things, and things that seem completely innocuous or completely inconsequential to us can actually have quite stark results in places and times that we didn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
And after watching this video, I started to think about, we talk about practice all the time, and like practice will help solidify the skill. And how many repetitions does it take? You always hear, 10,000 repetitions to become a master, or 10,000 hours or whatever. But I have a suspicion that, hey, Nate, it's good to see you, man. Missed you the other night at the night shoot, but we'll get you at the next one. Okay, so how many repetitions does it actually take to build a response from a stimulus? And I would argue that in some cases, it only takes one repetition. If you don't build a different neural pathway, and the only time you've practiced that stimulus, you did one thing, and that was it. And the reason I bring this up is kind of based on your conversation with Mike DeSargo a couple months ago around trauma. We know that a single traumatic event can cause a somewhat permanent stimulus response situation, not reaction, but response. And in fact, it can be very hard to undo that traumatic trigger response. And so it would stand to reason that it is possible that even just a single repetition could create that stimulus response connection.
Yeah, there's a lot of science behind it. The problem is qualifying it, and how do you quantify it, and how do you qualify it correctly. But there is some value. This is why I'm not going to do the 50 round bullshit. I tried it, and there was nothing valuable about me doing. And I've argued this for a very long time with other instructors who criticize from a good place. I'm not speaking negatively, but from a good place would criticize a seminar style class without any live fire training. And my conversation with them has always been like, well, what's your idea of live fire training after a 4-hour class in classroom? Like, well, take them to the range for an hour, 2 hours. And you can't do a whole lot with that. So it's the argument is you're actually instilling shitty habits in that. in that human being instead of doing it correctly. So like if I could do it in 50 rounds, like get good reps, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. So there is a lot to say to this. Then you have people like I fucking forgot his name, but he's a competitive shooter. He does well. He's not a pro or anything like that, but he's been to my class twice. He has a very difficult time shaking out the fucking looking at the gun while clear malfunctions or reloading or stuff. And it's because of those reps. So for sure. I'm
So let's kind of talk about what specifically, like a scenario where this guy would have taught himself or been taught to yell "pow pow pow." Again, we don't know. There's no way to know if this is the reason why he said it, or even whether or not he had, or what type of scenario training he had. But based on experience, I think we can both kind of visualize a scenario where "pow pow pow" is used as a mock attack indicator. So probably, if we're talking about a police officer, we're probably having role players who have a concealed firearm, and the cops or the cadets or candidates or even officers who are, on the force but receiving supplemental training are being taught to respond verbally to the stimulus, right? Because that cops are trained to yell gun when they see a gun, whereas like in the civilian world, we don't typically do that kind of thing. But the reason why they yell gun is to alert all the officers to the presence of a firearm. And usually the officer who's yelling gun, gun, gun is also responding by pulling his gun and preparing to or actually engaging with the suspect. But with a blue gun, there's no gunfire, right? And so it's entirely possible that the officer is going to yell gun, 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 or pow, pow, pow to simulate that gunfire is actually happening when he visually sees the gun and needs to simulate gunfire and also announce that there is a gun at the same time. And so I think if you watch the video, he goes pow, 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 gun, gun, gun in that order.
Correct.
He probably hasn't done it that much. I mean, if you just look at departments and, budgets and training time and all that stuff, we'd say it's a pretty good probability he hasn't had a lot of repetitions of yelling pow, pow, pow when he sees a gun.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, I have nothing to add to that other than that seems like the most plausible explanation for.
I mean, what other plausible explanation would there be for him yelling pow, pow, pow?
Pow, pow, pow. Yeah, unless he's fucking got Friday on the brain and he's thinking about fucking what's his name, Witherspoon.
Was it John Witherspoon? What was his name?
Yeah, John Witherspoon.
So this poor officer now is going to be known as Officer Pow Pow for the rest of his life. But it does go to show that we do need to be very aware of how the brain imprints information. I got into an argument with a pretty well-known instructor on YouTube in the comments about this, because he was talking about practice and he was talking about, how important practice is to maintain a skill. And he's on a flat range by himself. And, so he's talking and then he'll do a repetition on his target. His target's about 7 yards away, a small steel silhouette, a good sized target for practice. But he's not doing any movement and he's not doing any assessment. And I mentioned that to him and he was like, talking about all the reasons why he didn't need to assess, because he was alone on the range and he knew that there was nobody around. And I'm like, you're modeling practice for your students and you're doing a half-assed job of it because you know the condition of the range, and that is flat range thinking. And yelling pow 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 is simulation activity. It's not realistic.
It's that choreograph stuff. It's exactly what I talked about in that what it takes to be an expert video.
Mhm.
It's this idea of you create an environment in your brain and you say, well, this is the way it's going to be and this is the way it is,
Mhm.
but not understanding the subconscious and all of the connections, neurological connections that are being made while you're doing this shit. And then in real life, you fuck it all up, or potentially fuck it all up by doing shit like that.
Right.
I do want to kind of talk to Joseph and answer that. 1,000 bad reps takes 5,000 good ones to correct. There's not a science behind all of this stuff. 1,000 good reps in bad context or in the incorrect context takes a long time. I do not appendix carry because I have had many more repetitions in training strong side carry. If I can go back, I would take away strong side carry and just carry. Some of it has to do with laziness too. It would take me a lot longer for me to correctly and properly carry appendix to overcome the strong side hip. Appendix carry is significantly better just from an efficiency standpoint. So that's one of those where like it's not bad. It's just in context, I learned how to strong side hip because of the job. That was it. So
I'd say it probably highly depends on the person as well, as far as how many reps to overcome a bad habit. So,
yeah, are you tarded? Are you not tarded?
Are you consciously starting back from zero, and are you slowly building the skill in context? Because in the people that I've seen and trained with and trained, the people who slow down the process, who intentionally stop doing the other thing and start doing the new thing and intentionally take their time with it, it seems like that the new skill is built up faster. Now, I don't think the new skill is necessarily solidified yet, but we do start to see that as the tasks get more complex, as the mental demands get more complex, that the new habit is sticking if it was built or rebuilt correctly from the ground up.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it wouldn't take a lot of reps, but I don't, like you said, I don't think there's a formula for it. I don't think we can say, I've heard this all kinds, it takes 300 to 500 repetitions to build a skill and 3,000 to 5,000 to overcome a bad skill. And I don't think that's true. I think the idea really should just be, it's going to take you more repetitions to overcome a bad skill than to build it correctly from the beginning.
Well, and from a neuroscience, from an evolutionary standpoint, I don't think and it's all kind of intertwined and related, anyways. So I don't think it matters how we approach this. The biggest issue is that we humans have a horrendous habit of not accepting just shit the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
So we try and predict it. I think we talked about it, or I talked about it in the video, but there's plenty of studies. There's that study with mice and humans, and mice accepted that a button is going to shock me 20% of the time. I'll just accept my losses and take my 80% reward. Humans, on the other hand, would hit the button and try and predict. Those two buttons, one rewarded you 80% of the time, the other one 20% of the time. And humans would try and predict when the 20% one was going to reward, instead of just accepting, fuck it, I'm going to get punished or shocked, I think is what it was, like a light shock 20% of the time. I'll just accept 80%. Humans have this hard time. And we see this in class when people are like, well, not me. In my fight, it's going to be like this. So if I shoot the bad guy, my bad guys are going to stand still. And like they try and predict how, and then now your brain's like, kind of preparing for this weird scenario that doesn't exist, just because we have a hard time accepting that we're fucked.
Yeah, and I think this is something, and I'm not going to say that I'm well versed in this, but I know that there has been an extraordinary amount of study in humans and pattern recognition.
Yeah.
And one thing that we definitely know about humans is that we are so good at pattern recognition that we do it even when there's not a pattern.
There's no pattern. Yep.
And like with the mouse doesn't make that choice. The mouse doesn't have necessarily that same impetus. Like animals do pattern recognition as well. It's why you can train a dog, because the dog knows the pattern. But I think we almost outsmart ourselves by forcing patterns where they don't exist, where you wouldn't see an animal force a pattern that didn't exist. It's counterintuitive to survival.
Correct.
But for some reason we are prone to do that. And we're also prone to rationalizing things that don't make any sense. And I think you put those two together and you get people who come to incorrect conclusions for what they think are very good reasons, and they're just not good reasons.
And then you get pow, pow, pow.
Yeah.
And then you get pow, pow, pow in a fucking real firefight.
Yeah, it's hard to tell from the video, and I'm not going to pass judgment on this cop in any way, and because you can't just tell from the video, but there is a question we should ask, even though there's no way to answer it, which is, did he substitute yelling pow, pow, pow for actually firing the gun? Because if he did,
and he'll never admit to it,
and he may not even know.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this a lot. I've had more students than usual who have talked to me in the class or contacted me at some point after the class to talk about a self-defense encounter that they've had. And the question they always ask is, what should I have done? And unless we're talking about extreme circumstances, my answer is, I have no idea what you should have done in that situation, because I wasn't there and I wasn't perceiving what you were perceiving in that moment, and I can't value what you value. And so there's no way for me to pass judgment on this officer for when his decision to shoot is, because it really is up to him. But we could at least ask the question, did the stimulus cause a response that was counterproductive to the moment?
Correct.
So, because that's a loss of time in the fight. All right. What did Joseph say here? Thoughts on eye movement and gaze patterns studied by Force Science Institute. I don't know anything about that. I'm familiar with Force Science Institute, and actually they published something in their last newsletter that I also wanted to talk about. But I don't know anything about eye movement and gaze patterns studied by Force Science Institute. So if you have anything to add, I would definitely like to talk about it. But while we're waiting for him to add that, Force Science Institute came out with an article. It's kind of an opinion piece based on some study and some fact. Are you familiar with Force Science Institute?
No.
So they do force science studies pretty much focused around law enforcement, but basically studying and trying to learn more about use of force in law enforcement.
So
go ahead.
So I don't know where this is going,
Mm-hmm.
but from a civilian standpoint, we could already take most of those, not all of them, but most of those studies, and can't apply them to civilians.
Because it's a completely different context.
Well, it might be the same context. It's different processing of information. A cop knows what the fuck they're going into.
Mm-hmm.
So they may be a little bit more like eye and aware of potentials. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the fuck. Like if somebody is trying to break into my house, it's happening to me. So my focus visually, my focus intellectually, all of that stuff is not focused on the same thing as a cop is focused on.
Right.
It's not the same thing. Now, from a mechanic standpoint, I think there's value to it. But from I don't know what the gaze pattern studies was, but if we're looking at where the eyes were, if we're looking at where the brain was at, it, again, not everything is, there's no absolutes, but it's really hard to apply what somebody was anticipating to do versus somebody was simply reacting to a moment. It's two completely different things. And I think this is where most instructors fucked up. Tom Givens highlights that is the unfortunate thing about most instructors is they take police data instead of civilian data. And there's not enough study on what civilians do versus what cops do. And for obvious reasons, right? Like, I don't wear a fucking body cam. There's no...
Right. You don't have internal investigations evaluating every single confrontation you have.
Correct. Yeah, it's hard to quantify it. So we rely heavily on law enforcement, in which good intentions maybe, but incorrectly molds our training for civilians, and it's not the same thing.
So the study that I read recently, or the opinion on studies that I read recently in Force Science, was talking about reframing conflict with officers from a emotional response to more of a challenging response. So again, just based on what you just said, of course, there's going to be some context difference here. But if there are plenty of civilians who have been in a number of confrontations, some maybe even a lot of physical ones. Like, you see this with bouncers a lot of times, who are constantly being challenged by people and forced to be physical. And you see after enough repetitions that they start to develop a different mindset, where it's kind of hard to actually get them into a limbic system response. Because they have so much repetition that the stress levels don't go up as much. Now, you can still get them into a limbic response. So, a bouncer who is, talking to a drunk person, and then all of a sudden gunfire goes off behind the bouncer, that's probably going to induce that limbic system response, because the threat is coming from somewhere else rather than what that person was focused on in the moment. So it's not like they don't get scared or they don't operate out of that same sympathetic nervous system response.
It becomes routine for them. So
it becomes routine, and officers are the same way. A lot of the conflict that they go through becomes routine. And so the question was, if we could somehow reframe the conflict into a challenge response rather than an emotional response, then could we get a better result? And I think it's a nice goal, but I think even officers are going to have that stress response, that limbic system response, when especially like a gun or a knife comes into the conflict. Yeah. But it was an interesting read, and it kind of, got me thinking, even though I'm going to try not to draw conclusions from it. But it's one of the things
so what would that look like, though?
I'd have to go. I'd have to go back and read if I can find the.
So you guys need to do your homework and go to Force Science Institute and relay back next time.
Yeah,
because that sounds like a big task, and that would apply for what Joseph is saying for an armed security guard as well, right? It's this idea. So when you do security, when you're a bouncer, when you're a cop, when you're in the military, most of everything you do is offensive. You're doing it with you're trying to de-escalate something that hasn't happened yet. You're trying, or prevent it. I'm sorry. You're preventing something, just period. And you're anticipating that something may happen, and just your sheer presence is already preventing a lot of what could potentially happen just by you being there. A bouncer talking to drunk people becomes a routine activity. It's I have to do this stuff. If I'm walking by, don't deal with drunk people. So if a drunk person fucking yells at me, it's not as a part of my there's this video called The Science of Thinking. Highly encourage you guys to go watch it. I believe it's System 1 is what they call it. This idea that it's everything that's in the background. You're driving, you're clicking the stuff and you're watching TV and this is just stuff you don't even think about. And then system 2 is more of a complex thing. Like now I have to pay attention to this. Now I have to add some more thought to this and be more deliberate about my actions. And I think that's where the problem is where with a lot of these cops is these become the quote unquote routine, and that's why they're so dangerous. Is they happen so often that they're not expecting anything to happen all at the
Again,
same
going
time.
back to that pattern recognition,
Correct.
and falling into the pattern.
Correct.
And pattern recognition is extremely helpful for identifying problems because we tend to focus subconsciously so much on pattern recognition that we can ignore most of the stimuli in our environment. So I'll use the example when you're driving on the highway, you're not really paying attention to everything that's happening. There's no way you can do that. And you can't even pay attention to all the drivers on the road. You can't really do that either. So what your brain is kind of tuned for, or should be tuned for, and a lot of people it is tuned for, is to look for signals that are outside of the patterns. So you see somebody who we all expect everybody to drive basically in the center of the lane and travel at a set speed. And then you see somebody who is slowing down and speeding up and slowing down, and that's outside the pattern of what we expect. And then we tend to focus on that thing that's outside the pattern. Or we also do the thing where we know what behavior looks like that's dangerous. So most drivers who've been driving for a while have experienced where they see somebody do something and it's very subtle. So subtle, in fact, that maybe you couldn't even tell somebody what you saw, but you have a really good idea what's about to happen next. Yeah. You know that car is probably going to leave their lane, fail to signal, something like that. And so you pick up on a pattern that you couldn't even fully identify. And then you respond to that pattern, generally speaking, by creating space between you and that other driver, because you know you're going to need a little bit more time if they do the thing you think they're going to do. So that pattern recognition is very helpful. It's also got plenty of opportunity to hurt us too, by creating complacency or causing us to see things that aren't really happening. And so we have to be aware of those habits of pattern recognition and failures, and where they can hurt us. So, hey, what's up, Miguel? It's good to see you, man. So Joseph says, so other than hard skills, what skills should civilians work on?
Yeah, processing information and more of the stimulus response pattern, right? Like at the range, I think it's significantly more important for humans that are not cops, military, that type of stuff, working actively is if a stimulus happens, I should already have a response to that. And I don't mean if very specifically the guy with the knife walks at you at 2 miles an hour, like that's not it. It's just like if there's a legitimate threat that needs you to use your firearm, your response should be the startle, right? Because we see this all the fucking time. People lower their center of gravity, their hands come up. Shit, cops. I play this in video. I've been playing it a lot more in seminar style classes when the person's like, well, no, that's not what's going to happen. Cops, when they get ambushed, they just draw their gun and then let's go to the YouTubes, and I play videos of cops getting ambushed. And even cops, once they start getting shot at or a gun, they see a gun when they're being ambushed, not when they're chasing them, yelling, pow, pow, pow. But when they get ambushed, you will see the same reaction, which is lowered center of gravity, hands come up. You look like a fucking tard at the range, I promise. But this is what humans do. So adding that, if there's a malfunction, how can I not diagnose the malfunction, but yet still know what the malfunction is, just based off of stimulus, right? Like if I get
based on feel stimulus, not visual stimulus.
Feel stimulus, yeah, it's primarily tactile references, like the movement of the firearm. If it doesn't fully cycle, most likely it's a reload. But if it's not a reload because the magazine didn't fall right, it's weird how you can tell that the magazine didn't fall without you looking at the fucking magazine, because it's a tactile thing. So if it doesn't fall, then now your brain already knows without even thinking about, well, fuck, it's a malfunction. So strip the magazine, clear 3 times, insert new magazine, like that type of shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's more valuable than me trying to be super fast with my firearm. I'm not even worried about marksmanship, because self-defense isn't marksmanship. Self-defense is it's a good enough thing. People don't like it.
And for anybody listening, don't confuse marksmanship with accuracy.
Yeah.
Marksmanship is improving your ability to hit a smaller and smaller target to the point of a score. Whereas accuracy is, did you hit it or not? Whatever the target was, did you hit it or not? And using a target in defensive shooting is using a realistic target for high center chest or a small part of the head. So marksmanship shooting is learning how to shoot accurately only.
And precise, being precise and accurate.
Yeah, being precise and accurate according to a standard, rather than learning how to balance the speed and precision of your shots at a yes/no target. Did you hit it or did you not? So,
correct.
So let's talk to kind of add on to the question that Joseph asked. Information processing. This is something that I use to help students, and I use it for myself, especially when you're doing practice and not doing training. Visualizing a reason to shoot and a reason to stop shooting. Yeah. So at the range, I don't work off a buzzer. I don't work off a beep. I don't even need anybody next to me to tell me when to shoot. I visualize a relatively simple but somewhat realistic reason to shoot. Bad guy with weapon coming towards me, and I've decided to shoot. And then I start shooting and I visualize a reason to stop. Bad guy drops weapon, falls down, apologizes. And it happens, dude. It happens. Like, it's probably more in that plausible than probable. But I just saw one from a guy who was being robbed in his driveway, and he starts shooting and the bad guys all start running, and one guy, you can hear him on the doorbell camera just screaming, I'm sorry as he's running down the street.
I've seen it.
So and you don't have to do that fast. Like, that's not the point. The point is to train your brain to process information while you're doing the thing, while you're doing the shooty part.
And by the way, this is why you called out the instructor. Well, I don't know your motivation, but this is a good reason to call out that instructor is if you're practicing, right? Like if you're practicing and you're implicitly telling other people how to practice at the range. When the gun comes back, when the gun comes back to the high compress ready, which by the way should be a cue for your brain. Gun out here, pew pew pew. Gun here at the high compress ready at the chest or your ready position. I'm looking around. I'm evaluating whatever's going on, because that tells your brain when to do certain things. Your brain, from a hardwiring stance, needs something to tell it what the fuck to do. Like, it needs that stimulus. Every single time it needs that stimulus. I'm hungry. I get that stimulus. I start cooking. I go and buy something. I see a red light. I start to slow down. I see kids playing. I start to slow down. Every single time. I had one guy in my class who said, well, it's not the same thing, breaking and reloading your gun. You're like, but from a neurological standpoint, it is. Mechanically, it isn't. But your brain needs the activity in order for it to know what the fuck to do. Like, it's weird how your brain works. It's very linear.
And we have to think of the brain working in that limbic response, that sympathetic response, not in the cognitive response. Because, like, I could give you an extremely complex puzzle in the cognitive place, in the executive functioning. You can sit there and reason and logic and be efficient with the time that you have. But we're not working in that space. It's possible you could be in a self-defense encounter where you are working in that space, but more than likely there will be a sympathetic nervous system response. It might be high, it might be low, but it's the nature of a threatening environment that your body goes into more of a survival neuro response.
Yeah.
So,
and this is the difficult thing to convey to, which, by the way, I appreciate you guys being on here and asking questions.
Yeah, this is really good. This is what happens when we actually stay on schedule.
When we stay on schedule and promote and do other things, this is what happens. So I appreciate this. The most difficult thing that I find myself doing is explaining to humans that you don't need to do drills, that you just need to learn how to process information. Because oftentimes we want to be told what to do. Like step by step told what to do, instead of give you a concept and then you have to go figure it out.
Yeah. So like I'll tell you like what I do at the range when I go practice, which is not that often. I should maybe do it more, but I also kind of have this theory about practice and over practicing, and of the limited amount of time that I have, I don't need to be practicing these skills as much as some of the other things that I need to be doing. So, but when I go to the range, there's usually other people shooting at the range. And when I finish shooting, I do the bang, 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 and I bring the gun back to the high compressed ready, and I'm doing my information gathering. If a gunshot goes off near me, one of the things I'll do is I'll try to I'll just think to myself, was that a rifle or a handgun? And I'll try to think, how far down the range was that shot fired? And I'm just doing the exercise of taking the stimulus of gunfire and evaluating that stimulus as distance, type, direction, and that kind of stuff. And again, the point is to train the brain to collect information after I have engaged with the target. And that information could be visual, it could be auditory, it could be physical, by touch. And so that's not a drill. You can't, that's not the point. The point is not to say like, okay, listen for gunfire, because then if you go shoot by yourself and there's no gunfire, like there goes the practice. It's take in information, evaluate the information, make a decision based on that information.
Yeah, one of the things that we get in trouble for a lot in Mexico when we're doing some training down in Mexico is when the students come back to the high compressed ready. We get in trouble for that here, Pinkas more than me. But famously in Mexico at this point, people just get mad. Is one of the tricks that we do is people will bring their gun back and they don't do anything. They just are ready. And what we'll do is we'll pick up a piece of spent brass, little rock, and we fucking chuck it at the motherfucker. And it'll whack him in the head. And then that'll get their brain to be like, what the fuck is going on? Now, usually because they're in range mode and not in fight mode, they get emotional about it. Like, what the fuck? Like, why'd you do that? It's like, well, you were not doing what the fuck you're supposed to do. So now you have a stimulus to tell your brain fucking do something else. That shit hit you and it got you to pay attention to something else instead of just being overly stimulated by the piece of fucking cardboard that's in front of you that ain't doing a fucking thing for you. But that's the difference between doing a drill and actually working on processing information or responding or reacting to some other outside stimulus. So you could do that. You can have somebody check shit at you every once in a safely, right? Of course, and appropriately, not just fucking randomly for no fucking reason. People start getting used to the number shit, so we'll say the fucking certain number of your telephone number or your social security number or whatever. That is infinitely more important than trying to do a Presidente drill, because you already know what the fucking drill is. Let's do a dot torture drill. Like, you already know what the fucking drill is. Drills are not that important. It's the concept and learning how to process information and stimulus response. The problem with that is we're just saying words, and it's difficult for us to teach it unless we're at the range.
Well, when I'm in the class and the topic comes up about how should we practice? So Courtney's asking, where should we practice? But let me first give you what I recommend in the class when it comes to practice. Get into the hiker pressed ready, because a lot of ranges won't let you draw from the holster. If they will let you draw from the holster, then you can decide if you want to practice withdrawing from the holster. But
you could do it from the bench too.
What's that?
You could do it from the bench too.
From the bench, so the gun is on the bench and in a quick access safe, or even just on the bench. And you give yourself a stimulus. Visualize a stimulus, and as you're presenting the gun, take a step to the left or to the right. There is enough room in the stall for you to take a reasonable step. Yeah. Doesn't matter which direction, just take a step to the left or the right as you're presenting the gun. Fire at the target until you visualize a reason to stop shooting, bring the gun back, and do an assessment. Where is the RSO? Who else is shooting on the range? Is there more gunfire? Just pick something to pay attention to. And then that's the end of that repetition. And if you did that 10, 15, 20 times, you could get that done in 15 minutes, easy. You don't need to be there for an hour to do that. And you've built a lot of repetitions on that mental part. And
don't create a pattern on shots. So not always 3, not always 4, not always 5. Randomize the shit out of it. This kind of bleeds into what Joseph is saying here about dry fire practice. Is the problem with dry fire practice is there's no recoil, there's no feedback from the gun. I'm not talking about the target. I don't concern myself too much with the target. The target tells me a story, but it's not the whole. It's only one chapter of the whole book. So the problem with dry fire is once you press the trigger, there really isn't any reset. Even if you add simunitions or airsoft, there's not enough recoil or not enough it's not similar to what your brain is having to deal with at the range in terms of getting used to pressures and shit like that. Because your brain will try and establish how much pressure, how much everything. Same thing with your brakes is. Except for like the first couple days that you drive, your foot is pretty used to on how much pressure I need to apply, and then you replace the brakes and like, oh fuck, this feels different, and then your brain's like, fuck, it's now I need to get used to this pressure. And
you're allocating resources from your brain on this new problem. How hard do I need to push, rather than on the information processing of your environment?
Correct.
And when I fix my brakes from time to time, and I always have to go out and check them to make sure they're working. And sometimes they're not working properly. And where do you go to test them? You don't go into traffic to test them. You go to a quiet road where there are no other problems that are going to arise to fix this problem.
And just do it on the highway, downhill on I-70.
Yeah, downhill I-70 on Floyd Hill or something like that. You take it to a controlled environment to figure out what the problem is with the car. But dry firing is giving yourself this impression that none of that matters, and that all you need to do is worry about pressing the trigger straight back, and the rest of it you'll figure out in the moment. And the rest of it that you'll figure out in the moment is drastically going to change your information processing in the moment. It works for competition because you know the course of fire in competition. Correct. There's no chaos. There's no surprises. The only surprises you get in competition is when your super fancy expensive gun stops working.
Correct.
And you have to fix it.
Correct. Yeah.
So I want to answer Courtney's question in the springs. I go to Magnum a lot and DCF occasionally, and they're both great ranges, and I would just pick whichever one's closer to you and go to that one. So,
and each have 2 locations?
Yeah. DCF is east and west. DCF is out Garden of the Gods and Centennial, or Highway 94. And then Magnum is up on off of Interquest or Northgate and down on Southgate. So it's just really an issue of whichever one's closer. They're both good ranges. So
yeah.
So on the issue of data, we keep talking about data. This came up in the class, and this guy asked this question, and I thought it was a really good question. So when I talk about caliber, I talk about data a lot. But the problem with the data around caliber is there are an enormous number of variables that cannot be measured when it comes to self-defense shootings. So we have to be really careful with data, with how we evaluate data, and very careful with the conclusions that we draw from data. The one big valuable thing about data is, does it stay consistent as the data set grows? So as an example, AmmoLand has collected data on bear shootings and handguns. And their data has concluded that in 97% of human versus bear encounters where a handgun was used, the handgun did stop the bear attack 97% of the time. Doesn't matter what caliber, doesn't matter what firearm. If we're just talking handgun calibers, it doesn't matter revolver, semi-automatic.
There's 2 revolver fails, but
2 revolver fails.
Yeah.
So probably because they ran out of ammo. I'm just guessing. So that's a data set. It's not a great data set because there's a lot of things we can't measure. We can't measure the bear's motivation. A bear attacking because they're protecting their cubs is a far more dangerous bear that's curious because of the smell of food.
Correct.
And a bear in fall smelling food is far different than a bear in the middle of summer smelling food. So we do have to be careful with the data, but we do know that when they started collecting the data and they had somewhere around 40 or 50 bear shootings, the data said 97%. And then as the data set grew up into like 160 bear shootings, the same percentage was there, 96, 97%. So and the same is true with Tom Given's data on self-defense shootings. When it started out, it was a pretty high percentage of shootings were at 9 to 15 feet. And as the data set grew over 20 years, the percentages of distances stayed relatively stable over those changes, or over the expansion of the data set. But again, there's a lot of things we're just never going to know about those shootings that we need to be careful about drawing specific conclusions from.
Correct.
So the guy in the class, I was bringing up the data on handgun calibers at stopping attacks or stopping people. Not all of them were attacks. And Greg Ellifritz's data that he collected for a long time with over 1,700 shootings, where he had data on the outcome of the shooting, the number of rounds fired, and the caliber. I think those are the 3 parameters of his study. The data shows that handgun calibers, all of them function basically the same. There are some statistical differences, but they're very, very small. And there's so many things we can't measure that we would say the differences in these calibers really doesn't make any difference. There's no statistical significant difference. But this guy who was asking the question in the class, he says, well, I'm an emergency room nurse, and I see a lot more altered people coming into the emergency room. So you're highlighting here, caliber seems far less important than the willingness to use the firearm and to kill the bear. That's one of the conclusions from AmmoLand.
Yeah. What else did he say about when he sees a lot more people? He sees a
lot of altered people, and he's saying, I see a lot more altered people now than I did 10 years ago. So his question was, if the data you're drawing from is more than 10 years old, because it is, the Ellifritz data was published in 2013. His question is, does that data still hold up? And I don't really have an answer to that. I would suspect that it does hold up, but I think it was a really important question to ask in the class, to be critical of the data. I'm giving you a lot of information. You absolutely have a responsibility to raise your hand and say, hey, how old is that data?
Correct.
I'm not saying it's wrong, but should we question it? And we always should question it.
Always.
Yeah.
If it's with good intentions, right? It should always be questioned. To answer it at a superficial level, I don't think we've had enough changes in ammo technology in the last 10 years to really matter.
Well, handgun physics are still just handgun physics, and we can cheat a little bit with bullet technology, but defeat the nature of an object traveling at a pretty much set speed and penetrating the human body. So bullets do weird things in the human body. It's one of the things that makes them unpredictable. And handgun bullets are extremely prone to unpredictable performance inside of human bodies. The tissue that you hit, skin has its own tensile strength, its own elasticity, and different skin has different thicknesses to it. So the skin on your neck is relatively thin compared to the skin on your back. And bullets do, skin does absorb quite a bit of the energy of the bullet because it stretches so much as it's pushing through. Then you have muscle, and you have muscle of varying densities. You have bone of varying densities. You might have cartilage, which is different density than bone. You have organs that act different ways. Like lung tissue is pretty fragile, and bullets penetrate lung tissue pretty easily. Livers are completely different. The heart is different. The heart is a muscle, and so it's going to act different when it gets hit. And none of that changes. None of the human body changes with the update in bullet technology.
Yeah, and just kinetic energy in general does not fucking change at all. I mean, it's fucking physics at the end of the day. I'm trying to kind of get some data here. While Isaac deals with his dog.
Sorry, my stupid dog has been freaking out. She's I think she's losing her mind. So while you're pulling that up, I just want to draw attention that we do have a Reddit. And on the Reddit, I posted a couple videos in the last couple weeks on medical lectures on gunshot wounds. And the medical lectures can't tell us anything about what happened in the fight, but they can tell us a lot about what bullets actually do inside the human body. What were you pulling up there?
Oh, just from a kinetic energy standpoint, 147 grain, 9mm. The joules of energy, 443. And then you have the 45 230 grain bullet at 190 feet per second.
Meters per second?
It's feet per second.
Wait, 190 feet per second? That can't be right.
No?
It's got to be meters.
It's
Are you looking at what pounds?
No, I'm looking at joules.
Oh, joules. Because 45 goes about 900 feet per second.
Yeah, 190 feet per second.
Did you say 190?
890.
Oh, 800. Oh, okay. ESL or lazy tongue or bad ears on my part.
890 feet per
890
second.
feet per second. Yeah. So what's the joules on that? What's the
549?
So that's like 100 more joules.
100 more joules, and when we look at it from a foot-pound perspective, it's only there's a 80-ish difference.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit, not enough to really.
Well, the thing is, and this is part of what I'm drawing from these medical lectures, is on paper, these rounds are very different, but in the body, they aren't. The differences on paper do not translate into differences in the body until you start getting up to really high velocity rounds, up to rifle velocity rounds. And so you could say, oh, this has 80 more foot-pounds, but a baseball dropped at 10 feet onto a person on the ground has the same energy as a 9mm round.
Correct. Yeah.
But it's all focused in the 9mm round into a very small point.
Small concentrated area.
Small concentrated point.
Yeah.
And so the difference between a bullet profile of a 9mm bullet and a 45 bullet profile could actually cause quite a difference in performance, even though one has more energy. They're both going to act very specific to the bullet profile itself.
Well, this is the way skates work, right? Like ice skating. If you really think about it, for
Mhm.
anybody who wants to go study this, and this is the problem with trying to teach people about this stuff in a classroom. Like it's so fucking nuanced, and we have to get down to it. Like if you really think about how ice skates work, is it's really super fucking sharp, the blade, and then the amount of pressure that's being applied on the ice actually melts the ice. So like if you look at it from a microscopic level, it actually melts the ice, and you're actually gliding on the water that is being melted, just for that very brief moment.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because of the amount of fucking pressure that's being applied and concentrated to one single fucking point.
Mm-hmm.
If you did that with anything else, with your shoe or whatever, you would not have the same results.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck, if the ice was, or the blade was even a little bit different, it just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It absolutely doesn't fucking work. But it's the amount of pressure concentrated to one single point,
Mm-hmm.
which is the blade of the fine fucking tip of the blade. It causes it, that much pressure causes it to melt. You're gliding on water more than you are actually cutting through the ice.
Yeah. So,
just to kind of help with your point.
Emergency room doctors and surgeons, they know better than most people, especially in areas where, high probability of dealing with gunshot wounds. They know better than anybody how unpredictable gunshot wounds are. And because they have to treat them, and they have to find the bullet, and they have to, kind of try to track the injury path and repair the things along the injury path. So they're seeing these things like super close up. And they'll tell you it doesn't matter what the person coming in is, or what they were told. They don't make any assumptions about caliber when it comes to handguns. They just treat them all the same, because they all pretty much do the same thing.
Correct.
And
so I've got up here somebody who I work with. Well, two ladies that I work with, but there's this whole team. But the ones that I work with primarily, and have been working for 7-ish years. One of them is Dr. Emmy Betts. She heads up. She's really the one that started the Firearms Injury Prevention Initiative. And this is some of the conversations we've had with her. She's an ER doctor. That's her. That's what she is for emergency medicine now at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. And she will state this time and time again. And there's a few other ER doctors that we have these meetings with, and that's the common consensus every single time. If somebody comes to me with a 940 or 45, until I take that bullet out, there's not much that I can go from and be like, this is a 9mm, this is a 45, this is a 40. Once you pull out the actual projectile, then it's just like, okay, anybody who knows ballistics knows what the fuck that is.
Yeah, well, they just pull out the little measuring
correct
stick, and they just measure the diameter.
Correct. But from a visual standpoint, from a what the fuck, it's just like the bullet went in, and I need to go fix this shit. It's the same fucking thing.
Yeah.
From it.
And the body is weird, I mean, you'll have situations where an artery might have been injured, and that wound is actually like will close itself up based on position of the body or other tissue pushing on it in some cases. So you hit an artery with the bullet, and it didn't have the intended effect.
Correct.
This lecture I was talking about, one of them, this doctor was saying how some tissue in the body, the bullet as it passes through will actually just push the tissue out of the way, and it will pass right by the tissue, because the tissue has its own tensile strength or resistance, and the bullet is spinning as it's going through. And the weird physics of these different surfaces and forces and energy cause just strange things to happen, because handgun calibers, it's kind of like a knuckleball. It's not a very good analogy, but it's a decent analogy. A knuckleball is performing unpredictably because of the physics of this non-rotating sphere moving through the air pressure. And bullets are rotating, so I get that they're not the same thing, but we're just relying on simple physics to say, because of the right circumstances, this mass moving through the space and time is unpredictable, and bullets in human bodies are similar in that way.
This is why I've gone largely away from this idea of cover and concealment, because now I don't want to change gears too much, but
No,
maybe
go for it, yeah.
But it's that, right? Like if you say I'm going to go behind cover, and there's like, okay, cool, but then you have to consider how that cover is going to affect the way the bullet travels.
Mm-hmm.
If you're too close, if you're at the wrong angle, depending on which way they're shooting, right? Like if I have this mic in front of me and they're shooting at a certain angle, maybe it won't hit me. But if they're shooting at a different angle, it can hit this fucking foam or this piece of the metal that's underneath, and that fucking bounces up and it still fucking shoots me. So cover and concealment is much more complex than just I have a thing that's going to stop the bullet. Yeah, is it going to stop the bullet, right? We've seen skulls stop a bullet and it fucking deflects.
Yeah, your skull becomes cover for your brain.
So it's much more nuanced than all of this stuff.
Yeah, and breaking it down into simple drills does not drive home the point of the dynamic nature of everything that's going on.
So here's where I think the worst advice is for gun people. This is probably what I can think of right now. I'll have to think about this a little bit more. The worst advice that I think instructors and people give other humans in the gun world is you do what you think is best. Go to this class and you make it work the way you want it to work. And there is a truth to I have physical limitations, so I have to adapt to that information to make it work for me. But it is not true that I'm going to change how physics works and I'm going to manipulate it to work best for me. So like for an example, if I want to grab a gun and I don't want to hold it up as high as possible. I got a gun over there, but I just don't want to reach for it. But I don't want to hold it up as high as possible because I feel it rubbing my webbing a little bit too much. So I'm going to hold it too low. Well, what is that realistically going to cause? It's going to cause the gun to fucking rotate a little bit more. You're going to have less control over it. So you can't do whatever the fuck you want.
Mm-hmm.
You have to work within the realm of reality. But I hear that shit a lot is, well, you just take the information you think is best for you, and then you make that work for you. Like, no, motherfucker. Like it's.
Well, and the reason why people, I think the reason why people attach to that is they think to themselves, okay, you must know what you're talking about, so I'm going to listen to what you're saying, but then I'm going to set up a scenario in my head where I'm going to take what I want from that and apply it to that scenario. So it's choreographed training. It's I took what's useful for what I think is going to happen, and I'm going to train for that thing that I think is going to happen. And what the IDS program is based on is you have no idea what's going to happen, but this is the way the gun works, and this is the way the body works, and this is the way the brain is likely going to work because of the unique nature of this. And let's do what we can to integrate those three things into the chaos of the threatening environment that you're in.
Yeah.
And so going back to Joseph's question, it's good fundamentals in context without adding anything choreographed to it.
Correct.
Or as little as possible choreographed. So let's talk about the realistic nature of going to the range. You know where the target is.
All the time.
You can't change that part of it. That's choreographed, but there is no way around that.
Not really.
You can divert your attention somewhere else. You can look at the if you're at the range, you got the little thing that controls where the target is, and you can look at that and say to yourself, all right, stimulus, and then you can look to where the target is. So you can kind of try to change the direction that your attention is going to travel to, but you still know where the target is.
Correct.
But to operate safely, we must know where the target is.
Correct.
We can't do that any other way and still make it safe enough to train.
Yeah, this is where drills that that have you looking at different stuff, right? Like we have numbers on them, and instead of calling a number, we'll say the fourth number of your telephone number, and then now you're actually looking around for the stuff before you extend your gun.
Right.
But now you're processing the information. The target kind of, you didn't know where it was at while still knowing where it was at.
Mm-hmm.
You just didn't know. You're responding to information that I gave you. Again, you're processing fucking information.
Yeah.
But you're going to do that, and you have no choice in the matter. So you can't do what you think is best. You have to do what we know from an empirical evidence standpoint is most likely going to happen. Again, back to your data conversation, is data isn't perfect. We can't predict 100% what's going to happen, but we do have an established pattern. The Rangemaster data is still the best we have because, one, it's for civilians. It's not law enforcement stuff. It's consistent with the data that I have with the 20 students that I've had to shoot people in self-defense. It's consistent with the data that I have for me personally, the 2 times that I've had to use my gun in self-defense. So it's a consistency there. So we can rely on saying this is what is most likely to happen, but also pay attention to the other shit that's not very likely to happen that is still valuable.
Right. So going back to, I just want to answer Nate's point. Everywhere I see says that anything less than 10 millimeter just tickles a bear. The motivations of the bear are a factor in this. And more than anything, the bear is not used to the noise of gunfire. They might be used to pain, they might be used to injury, but they're not used to noise of gunfire. So it's really hard to evaluate exactly what the bear is responding to when it's being shot at.
Well, the AmmoLand articles, if you look at them, there's 3 cases where the bears died.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a psychological stop. That was, one of them was in the Russian River. If you look at those, and these are all reports from Department of Wildlife Fish and Games.
Mm-hmm.
The one guy was attacked. He was fishing in Alaska, Russian River. Grizzly bear attacks him. He shoots it twice with a 9mm. I think Brenner was his last name. He shoots it twice. The bear dies. We can conclude that shit more than tickled him.
Yeah.
9mm, and the
It
bear,
tickled his dead bone.
yeah, and the bear was motivated to die by 2 shots of a 9mm.
Mm-hmm.
And then again in Alaska, there was a guide defended himself and the client with the 9mm. Beaver Creek, Montana. So there's many cases where the bear died.
Mm-hmm.
And we know the motivation there. It was a 9mm in its fucking body.
Yeah. But there's all kinds of things we can't exactly know when the bear decides to stop, but we can look at the whole data set, and the whole data set gives us the best conclusion that we can get. For all the data that we have and the holes in the data, if we look at the large conclusion of the data, especially considering the data the percentages stay stable as, I can't even say this stuff. The percentages stay stable as the data set grows. Stable data is more reliable data than unstable data. So, and then I want to answer Joseph's comment. A new study similar to Greg's study would be good. Maybe add additional data points like physiological stops versus incapacitation of the CNS, et cetera, blood loss. I think the only reasonable way you're going to get that kind of data is to review all the available video data and also slice it up in context. So it has to be civilian. It can't be police. And we also have to be careful about drawing conclusions that we can't really know from the data. And so, I think it'd be great. And I think in the last 17 years of the proliferation of the smartphone and cheap cameras, I think we could benefit greatly from somebody who's willing to do that work. I actually started to do that like a year ago, kind of on a whim. And I got quickly overwhelmed with how involved that whole process was going to be. And of the data that I did start collecting, I was like, wow, there's some really good stuff here. And then I started realizing, oh, but you're leaving out this. Oh, but you're
Yeah.
leaving out that. And then I'm like, man, I'm not the right person to be doing this.
That's kind of the one bad issue with like the range master data, right? Like
Mhm.
if we look at the range master data will give you 92-ish%, I think, of good guy bad guy fights are at anywhere between 9 and 21 feet. So, but we use the data as 86%, not the 92%. In 86% of the fights, it was 9 to 15 feet. And then the only reason is because the way you shoot at someone at 9 feet is drastically different than the way you would apply the same skill at 21 feet. So that's the only reason why we would separate 9 to 15 feet versus the 15 to 21 feet, is there's enough of a skill development issue at 9 to 15 and 15 to 21, more so because of the 10 feet and 20 feet difference. That 10
Mhm.
extra feet, it very quickly for a lot of humans have to lower down the velocity and increase the precision and all of this stuff.
Yeah, and you see that with students a lot because, if we all just spent the day shooting and we decided to go from 9 to 15 to 21 feet, it wouldn't take that much time for people to be able to shoot reasonably well at the longer distances, but that's not what we're doing. We're training in that dynamic critical incident, and we're doing movement and assessment and information processing. And once we get out to that 21 feet, man, the shooting just really falls apart for a lot of people.
Completely.
And that's okay because it's the training environment, and we're trying to find our boundaries and the limits of our skill, such as it is at that time. But it's a pretty stark difference at 21 feet than it is at 15. Absolutely.
Very quickly to gun websites. Always appreciate you coming out. Very
absolutely.
consistent. He's more consistent than we are at showing up to our podcast.
That's what I was going to say too.
he shows up more than we do.
Yeah,
I always appreciate that. But we've touched on the video scenario stuff, and scenario overall is a mostly only because it's not done properly. I think DeSargo has slightly convinced me that if done properly, you can accomplish it. The only problem with scenario training is your brain knows what the fuck is going to happen, and that's not what civilians do. So if I go to the restaurant today, I don't know if there's going to be an attack or not, and in fact, my brain is not even considering an attack. I'm looking and I'm like, okay, if something happens, just very briefly, these are my exits and this is my stuff. Standard bullshit, right? But I don't sit there with the anticipation of, oh my God, somebody's going to kill me. And video scenario training does that. I know I'm going to the range to look at a screen. Oh, you got here. I'm going to look at the screen, and the screen is going to, I already know what the screen's going to tell me. The screen's going to give me a bad guy, and when the bad guy shows up, I need to shoot it. I don't know that. I may hear gunshots at a restaurant that are not a bad guy. It might be a good guy shooting the bad guy that just pulled out a knife. And if I respond by shooting the good guy that defended himself from the bad guy that didn't have a gun, but needed to be shot, then I missed the whole processing information because I was in the anticipation to need to shoot mode more than anything else.
So there's also another question that comes along with that is the effort of good video scenario training. Let's just say that it exists. Like, let's say Mike's on the right track, Mike DeSargo's on the right track, and actually comes up with a protocol that's valuable in context. But the effort required to do that, is it justified beyond what we would just normally do in the IDS fundamentals class?
Yeah, it goes back to what we talk about with plausibility principle, right? Is you have to respect your resources. If you could only afford 1,000 rounds, doesn't make sense to spend it on room clearing classes when the chance of you being in a team situation with the battle buddy is slim to fucking none. It disrespects your resources by applying them to something you're not going to fucking use at
Unless
all.
you're just doing it for fun.
Correct. Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
if your goal
For
is
sure.
to have fun and play a game, a high stakes game, then that's your goal,
Correct.
and you've aligned your spending with that goal. But if your goal is to train to defend your life or the life of someone else, then yeah, it's disrespectful to that process to waste time on something that's very likely never going to happen.
Correct. And if it does happen, no reasonable human being would even recommend it because of how incredibly dangerous it is.
Mm-hmm.
You talk to any reasonable Navy SEAL and any reasonable Delta Force and any reasonable SWAT leader, they will tell you this shit is so fucking dangerous that we're starting to use robots to go do that shit. Like, we don't want to do that shit.
Yeah.
There's so many blind spots. There's so many dead space, as they call it, that you can't, and it's done with teams. You're not going to be with a team. You're going to be all by yourself. So it's with video training. I don't know of any here in the state of Colorado that I would recommend.
Yeah, that we'd recommend.
That
I'm pretty sure that there is video training available in the Denver metro area.
None that I would recommend.
Yeah. Kind of on that CQB concept, the room clearing and everything, there's been some videos that have come out of Ukraine and out of Israel where you get body camera or GoPro camera footage of room clearing. And the one rule that's always respected in room clearing doesn't apply when you got two people with rifles shooting at each other. And that is, in the training environment, the walls are bulletproof. But in the real world, they're not. And as soon as the opposing forces become aware of each other, they pretty much start shooting as if the wall is not even there.
Correct.
And for all intents and purposes, once you know the other person is there, the wall really doesn't matter.
This is Russia and Israel, where or the Middle East, where all of their walls are fucking made out of concrete.
Yeah,
and they're still trying to shoot through the wall. And imagine here in the U.S.
Yeah, like here in the U.S., your walls are made out of
paper,
expensive paper. Yeah. So now I'm not a CQB person. I don't pretend to know anything about this stuff, but in passing interest, I do watch some videos sometime. And there's this guy, his name's Kinetic Concepts, and he's clowning on all the CQB training. And he's like, watch what happens in the real world with this stuff. And there's these Israeli soldiers who come up on some dude in a room. And as soon as they know he's there, they all just back up and throw a grenade. and the guy is shooting at them through the wall, and he's like, there's no like all like cool SWAT stuff going on here. This is just chaos and overwhelming force, and people are getting hurt. That's not something that you want to do. If you can avoid that situation by barricading and waiting for that threat to come to you, if they must come to you, which is a completely different concept when it comes to that self-defense plan. And so, yeah. So
this is ultimately why we're not fucking super popular.
Yeah.
You mentioned this, I think, last podcast, where it's just like the truth is really difficult to sell.
Yeah.
And it's so true, right? Like this is not what people want to hear. People want to hear, give me excuse to do cool shit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, you don't need an excuse to do cool shit. Do cool shit. I talk shit about douchey guns all the fucking time. And I love douchey guns. Like it's not because I hate them. It's not because
we did the night shoot, the Moons Out, Goons Out, and this guy Ryan, he shows up and he's like, "So what are we gonna do?" I go, "Honestly, dude, you are gonna dictate what we do tonight because I don't do this stuff on a regular basis, and you do. So let's do whatever you want." He's like, "Well, I'd like to do a little warm up on some timer." I'm like, "Cool, let's do it. Let's get on the timer and let's play around with our rifles." And it's fun, and you're chasing times and everything. But the context here is we're out here having a good time.
That's it.
Dressing up like our favorite movie characters,
LARPing the shit out of it,
and shooting in the dark for fun. So let's do that thing.
Fucking do it.
Yeah. But
yeah, I get this a lot, like with gear whores, right? Like, what kind of light should I put on my gun? I was like, I don't know, just get a fucking nightlight for your house. Because because where the range is at, right, where the training ranch is at, it's out and basically in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And do you guys have lights
On the home
in the
defense?
house?
Oh, in the house? Yeah, we have a few lights. There's some lights out there.
There's
Yeah.
fucking electricity exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Electricity exists.
In fact, your house is probably safer if you have a nightlight in every room, so that you don't trip
Plenty of
over stuff and fall down the
Correct.
stairs. And
Also, plenty of studies have shown that well-lit homes get broken into significantly less than fucking blacked out houses. So like,
no, I'd rather put my $12,000 night vision setup and go pretend like I'm going to be able to do information processing through night vision.
Like it just like, it's fun. It's super fucking fun, and I would never take that away from somebody, especially in America where you can get it if you so desire.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's irresponsible for an instructor to try and say this is the way.
This is the self-defense way.
This is the self-defense way. Be really good at a timer.
Mm-hmm.
Be a really good choreographed shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, it's going back to, we're trying to predict shit that we cannot predict, and I think that's really bad advice.
Yeah, I've been watching Ben Stager's channel, and he's a high-level competition shooter, and he is an extremely well-accomplished competition shooter. And if you're going to go learn competition shooting, you probably should learn from him. He's not only good; he's good at efficiently communicating the skills to the competition shooter.
Is he better than Latham?
Well, I've never seen any of Latham's videos where he's really instructing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Latham's an excellent shooter and by reputation, a good instructor. So yeah, absolutely. The problem is people are taking Ben Stager as a defensive shooting resource. And he even talks about his own skill in the context of self-defense shooting. And that's the problem. It's not the same thing, but because of a blind spot and not understanding the nature of a dynamic critical incident, people are taking that high level of skill in the wrong context and saying, this is who I want to learn from.
Yeah, this kind of shifts gears for me a little bit from an ethical integrity standpoint. And this is, I think, why we suck at making money. We could make money in a very fun, popular way if we really wanted to, but then that would deteriorate our the way we teach human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So it's these humans are like, well, fuck, it's easy money, because humans respectfully will buy cool shit. iPhones are not better. I will die on that fucking hill. iPhones fucking suck. We see the memes. We see the memes of iPhone coming out with fucking 15-year-old technology and pretending like they came up with the shit. They're really good at being an emotional company, right? Like, it's just like, we're the cool kids on the block, and they're really good at that shit. But they have no fucking morals. They have no fucking ethics. I'm not saying Samsung does. I'm not saying any of that shit. I'm just saying they'll do anything, including have fucking slave work in China to make maximum profit. And by the way, I'm nothing against having kids that want to work. It's fucking having suicide nets on your fucking building. That kind of makes me question whether or not they want to be there. So and that's another complex conversation, but the problem that I have, not just from a humans learning the wrong things, they're also being sold this idea, and because they pay money, they feel like there's some value to it. There's monetary value, but there's actually no fucking value to it whatsoever. And I think that's wrong. I think that from an ethical standpoint, for you to sit there and be like, well, as long as people pay me money, who gives a shit? We had to yell at a guy in Mexico because he was selling really shitty holsters, but they look cool. And we proved it to him with the student. And when we asked the student, why the fuck did you buy this holster? The lady was like, well, it's because he told me this was really good and blah, blah, blah. Like, no, this is fucking hot garbage. And she kept telling me, well, I thought so too, but he kept saying this one. And But like, it was just an upsell. Like, that's, I think if you're going to work in the space of humans die or live because of the shit that you share, you have an ethical responsibility to share the correct shit.
Right.
If we were just doing fun stuff, like, fuck it.
Yeah.
Fucking put on helicopter fucking helmets and go hover around and shit like that. And I think that's a big problem with humans who just want to value money more than they value anything else.
Yeah. And so like when I talk about this stuff, I think that I am not trying to elevate myself as a purveyor of this information. I credit the information itself. If I am good at passing this information on, fine. I want to be the best I can at passing this information on, but I am sharing it with the students, not because I'm trying to feed something in me. It's because if we're going to spend money and time learning how to defend ourselves, I have worked very hard to seek out the absolute best information. And you and DeSargo were talking about this in one of the two conversations you had, where the deeper you get into the understanding of the context, the more sense the IDS curriculum makes.
Correct.
Like, and I've experienced this too. At no point in my knowledge journey of the human body, the human brain, physics, the nature, probable versus plausible, all of that, at no point have I run into anything that goes counter to the way that the IDS program teaches. Now, I totally accept that at some point I might actually run into something.
And we hope you do. Like, that's the hope.
Yeah. Getting back to what we said, questioning the data, questioning the science, and making sure that we're being critical of it. But as far as I understand, the program always updates when that information is discovered and adjusts to, okay, well, we thought this was true, but now we're finding out that something else is running into that, and how do we adjust? And in the classes, every class that I've ever attended that's in the IDS framework, it's encouraged that you challenge any of the information in there.
Correct.
Because if it's right, it should be something that can sustain that challenge. And if it's wrong, we all want to know if it's wrong.
We must seek that shit out. Yeah, for sure.
And like when I listen to other instructors talk about, every instructor thinks they're teaching the right thing. I mean, I don't know why you would teach it if you didn't think it was the right thing. But when you challenge it, I mean, I've seen this firsthand. A lot of instructors will start to take it personally when it's challenged, and they'll get their feelings hurt over it.
Correct.
And if you tell me that I'm really shitty at talking, like, I might get a little upset about that. I know it's true, so you're probably not telling me something I don't already know. But if you say, "Hey, what you're teaching here is wrong," that doesn't hurt my feelings, because it's not me; it's the information.
Yeah, because it then it deserves a follow up. Cool. Explain to me how it's wrong, why it's wrong. Give me facts on why it's wrong,
right?
And why is it? Because now we're talking about facts, right? It's if you are honest about being the best protector that you can be, you want to challenge the information. You don't want to just say timers are awesome because it measures something,
or say timers are bullshit because I don't like them.
Because I suck at it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's not a valid. Yeah, for sure, that's not a valid reason. I often go on a not a tangent, but I talk a lot about in classes why hammered guns are not good for self-defense. And I just had a guy with the staccato, and he comes and I explain all this shit, and I talk about the physics, and I talk about the science from an engineering standpoint. A 1911, a hammered gun, too many parts. If shit happens, I could show you the videos of extreme circumstances. If you have a gun with too many levers, too many external safety mechanisms, like there's a pitfall for all this stuff. So anyways, he came after the class, and he asked in the class, he's like, "Hey, I have a staccato." He had already mentioned it because I made fun of him for having it. And then he says, "What gun do you recommend?" And I had to stop him. I said, "Are you asking me because I talk shit about it, or are you genuinely, you yourself, wanting to get a different gun? He says, well, both. I was like, well, let's break this shit down. Are you somebody who trains a lot with your firearm? He says, yeah, probably more than some. I was like, then maybe the staccato is not going to be a bad thing. I'm speaking in class to humans that are maybe going to make it to the range once or twice a year.
Yeah.
And for the 99.99% of the humans that own guns out there, a staccato is not going to be the correct one because of technology. Now, if you want to overcome that, it's still an efficiency thing, right? Like, my Glock is still more efficient than your staccato. My Avidity Arms PD10 is more efficient than your staccato. But I will concede that if you are somebody like Jerry Michulik who wants to carry a fucking revolver, you will be better with your fucking revolver, more efficient than your revolver than somebody who doesn't train with a fucking Glock.
Yeah, and so it's not just a 1911; it's specifically a 1911 that is in 9mm caliber with a very tuned mechanical device to improve the efficiency of the pulling of the trigger. There are advantages when the device is tuned to perform faster. However, I think that those advantages are actually quite small in a fight, not in competition, but in a fight, because you can only shoot so fast in a fight.
Correct.
The things that happen in competition, we know this because we see this in actual shootings. People shoot slower in a fight because, and my suspicion here is the brain is still trying to process information while you're pulling the trigger.
Correct.
Rather than just releasing and just saying, no, my job is to shoot and not do anything else. Correct. And if that's true, then your finger can follow that impulse. But if your brain knows life and death is in the line and I need to understand what's going on here, your finger can only respond so fast.
Correct.
So the staccato has some advantages. I would argue that they're not significant.
No.
But if we're talking about competence, we'd say if you are extremely competent with that gun, then the differences between me saying Glock 19 and you saying staccato are probably really not that important.
Correct.
And so if
somebody who's actually putting in the work.
Right. Just like somebody who's driven a stick shift their entire life and you're like, no, you should drive an automatic. You're like, okay, I can drive an automatic, but I really like driving stick. And I like the fact that I can downshift on hills. Fine. Okay. Like that makes sense to me. Correct. But somebody's like, I am only ever going to drive this car once a year, but I really want a stick shift.
Correct.
Like, why? Why do you want a stick shift? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, correct. And it's I would still encourage people to get modern day striker firearm over a hammered gun.
Well, the staccato is not drop safe in some conditions.
Correct.
So there's that.
And again, I've seen people struggle doing one-handed reloads or clearing of malfunctions with hammered guns just because of the complexity of the firearm. So now if I'm in a very extreme circumstance, that goes point to the modern day striker firearm. But again, there's a lot to be said for the human that's willing to engage the safety, disengage the safety in training and practice, and all of that stuff versus most humans that are not going to do that.
Right. So when we did the night shoot the other night, and this gentleman Ryan is out there and he's got a staccato, and every single time he's extending or getting that gun up from the holster into the shooting position, I can hear the safety clicking off, and every time he brings the gun back to move to another position, I can hear the safety clicking back on again. And that's somebody who's spent a lot of time on that gun. And just like with the rifle, is running the safety on the rifle and developing that skill into an automated response. So
again, it's for me, it's cool. I'm never gonna even question how awesome you are with your gun because I fucking seen it. It's the people, 99% of the other fucking humans who are like, well, I just have it because it looks cool. Admittedly, 1911s are much sexier than modern day striker firearms overall in general. But most of these humans, when you ask them or you see them in class, they don't run the fucking safety, and you're like, what the fuck? They're like, well, it's too much, or well, you chose a gun with the fucking safety, and that's like generally who we're talking about, right? I think there's there's a lot to be said for that.
So gun website says, do you think there are multiple valid schools of gun training? I don't know all the schools. So like, I can't answer that.
So it's tough to say, because I don't think neuroscience is a school of gun training.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think physics is a school of gun training. Neuroscience is neuroscience. Physics is physics, period. I think if you follow the science, that is the way.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're trying to bypass the science, like say maybe you get a red dot and somehow you believe eyes work differently just because you have a red dot, I think that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on how we're classifying schools of gun training. I would say that for the humans that are properly teaching body's natural reactions,
Mm-hmm.
and for the people that are properly teaching physics when it comes to the usage of a firearm, I think that's the only way. So I'm iffy on that if there's valid ones.
Mm-hmm.
One, I would have to be told what like you said, like I don't know which ones there are.
Yeah.
And I think it's also wrong to have this mentality of that's just another tool for my toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a framer, I have one hammer. That's my framing hammer. I don't have a fucking mallet. I don't have like it exists it's somewhere else, but it's going to be in a different context. If I'm a self-defense shooter, I only have one hammer, and that's fucking it. I might have a screwdriver, but the screwdriver is now representing self-defense, hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
I may have some pliers, but now those pliers are representing running the fuck away, and I'm a good sprinter or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not. So I think regardless of whether we would agree that there's only one way of teaching self-defense or not, I think if you are going to get into the self-defense, you should only follow one way, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it is the wrong way, I think, and I'm just spitting here, so I may reevaluate this later on. I think that if you have something that I kind of disagree with, but you're sticking to it, at least you're being consistent in that fuck up. I disagree on the fuck up,
Mm-hmm.
but at least your brain isn't trying to figure out, like, I have 10 schools of training coming at me at the exact same time, and I don't do anything because my brain doesn't know what the fuck to do.
So like, there was an instructor that I spent an afternoon with several years ago, and I don't know his entire philosophy of training or all the things that he did. I just know that in the time that I spent with him, he was 100% focused on realistic fights. And that's the background he came from was, some different conflicts that he had been part of in Africa. And he was very, very focused on what works, what's efficient, and what works in the chaos of a fight. And in the implementation of the skills, when he's putting the students through the implementation, there's really no rules. And so they have to respond to the chaos efficiently to get through the scenario that they're in. And this wasn't even shooting scenarios. This was exfiltrating from an ambush situation. So they're not even like accessing guns and shooting back. They're just doing information processing and planning and executing the getting out of a chaotic, dangerous situation. So I would say that's an example of somebody who's trying to take the realistic nature of a fight and apply principles in the fight, movement, information processing, assessment, all that stuff. So it's an example of like, I don't know if I would agree with everything that guy said and did, but from what I saw, I was like, this is fairly realistic stuff in the context of what it is they're trying to accomplish, which is communicating, movement, and assessment. And they're being shot while they're doing it. They're being shot with simunitions and so now looking back on it, I might not agree as much as I did in the moment, but I have questions. I'd have a moment to reflect and say, what do I think about this? As opposed to somebody who's like, okay, we're gonna do the bill drill now to train. Like, absolutely not. No, I don't agree with that in any way. And I think your philosophy's all fucked up if that's the way you're training people.
Yeah.
So And then Joseph says, I would speculate less than 30% of handgun owners train or practice. I would say
A
less than that.
lot less.
Yeah.
A lot less.
Yeah. I also recognize that the human brain is tuned for fighting. And it's not necessarily good at it, but it is tuned in that direction. And so I think sometimes we overestimate, or we put an overemphasis on how ineffective you're going to be because you've never trained or practiced. And I want to be careful with this because I don't want to give people the green light to just be like, yeah, I'll probably figure it out.
Yeah.
But I don't want to shit on gun owners who don't have time, awareness, or access to do the kind of training that we really like to see them do. Most gun owners don't train and practice because they don't understand the value. And if you don't understand the value, you are not going to put a priority on it.
So how are you qualifying this? Because I believe that a little bit more than 30% go to the range.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about not going to the range. I'm talking about
not
training
even
or practice.
30% go to the range.
Yeah, I'm qualifying this as just training and practice, not hobby shooting, which is what an overwhelming amount of humans that go to the range do is hobby shooting.
Yeah.
Not train or practice.
Well, I think if the number was 30%, we wouldn't see gun stores and gun ranges struggling.
Correct.
So I just think based on what we see showing up and doing it, I think it's way less than 30%. Right. I think it's a problem if you're practicing the wrong thing. But I also think that if we, I presented this concept, I think, in the last podcast of like laziness is not a real thing. It's just priorities. And if you don't understand the value of something, how could you prioritize it over the other things that are important to you? And it's a cultural thing. And we have a responsibility to promote the culture of the importance of training. But we also don't want to drive people away and say, hey, you're a lazy shithead because you don't train.
Yeah.
Well, if they understood how important it was, I bet they would train. Correct. How do we communicate how important it is? And how do we get the priorities aligned? And so it's a tricky thing. I don't think it's as black and white as most.
I think we should record everybody and motivations.
Yeah.
Like record everybody in the class. Because I asked this in class from time to time when it's appropriate, like, why are you here? Very simple question to ask in a gun class. And a lot of them were like, well, times are crazy. And my neighbor's best friend's dog, he just got into some shit. So I think if we just recorded that and then fucking clipped it and then send an email and be like, hey, you said it.
Yeah.
You fucking said it.
Yeah.
Because they say it in class, in seminar style classes.
Yeah. You know what's crazy is that I asked that question, and for a while I was asking it in every class, and then I got sick of the answers, so I stopped asking the question. I feel like this is my suspicion. A lot of people, when you ask them why they're there, they don't really know why they're there.
Correct. So that their automatic reply is kind of like when you go to a restaurant and they ask you, how was everything? You just say, oh, good.
Yeah.
But that's not really what you mean. It was just the automatic or the automated response that you have.
And I don't know what the problem is. Like, I don't know how to evaluate that as a problem, except to say, like, if you don't really know why you're here, why did you take 3.5 hours out of your day?
So, and this is, it kind of goes back to the data stuff. I was talking to a data person, and this is what she went to school for and all that stuff. And I asked her about why is data so shitty. And then, well, she says it's because a lot of surveys and a lot of data collection, it doesn't ask the questions the way they're supposed to be asked, and the way you're supposed to, according to her anyways, the way you're supposed to ask the questions is kind of like your SAT test. It's basically the same question reframed different ways, because then people think about it differently, like, oh, now I know what the fuck you mean. So you ask it 4 or 5 different times in the same survey, and you'll get many times different answers to the same question, just asked differently. And I think that's where we need to do with our data collection. And I think people need to do that to themselves, is ask themselves the same question in a different way or from a different perspective.
That's actually something I've identified for myself for improvement in the classes is learn how to solicit answers from people better. Because like one of my defaults is anybody have any questions? And that's a terrible question because a lot of times you just get no response. And if I asked a good question, if I presented that in a way to solicit responses, then I would get more responses. So I see it as a deficiency on my part that I'm not asking the right questions of the students in the class. So I've just been working on that by just sitting there and thinking, instead of saying, does anybody have any questions? Let me ask a pointed question of the class and try to see if I can get people to respond to that.
Yeah.
So,
that works. That works wonders when you ask them a question that it works most of the time.
Like the way we teach firearm safety in the IDS program is very different than the way pretty much everybody else teaches firearm safety. And then you sit there and you go, anybody have any questions? And everyone's like, nope, I get it. I'm like, really? I just fucking blew up your perception of firearm safety and you got no questions? Like, there's no way I'm that good of an instructor that I just answered every possible question.
Yeah.
So instead I've been trying to ask questions like, what about this is surprising to you? Or what did I say or about this that you find the hardest to understand? And I'm still learning. I'm not that great at it, but it's an area of improvement. So
I want to cover Gun Website's question here. And this is a question that I cover in one of my videos when I talk about being an expert. I do talk about this, and really the person who brought it up was Veritasium. When he has this conversation, is this idea, for those of you guys that are listening and not watching, he asked the question, people do not ever up training with our vehicles. We drive every day. Yes, we have accidents, but was their fault most of the time? We end training at age 16 for most of us. And everyone is comfortable with that. No, and the idea is, because we're not striving to be better. So we never get to an expert level of driving vehicles because we don't go through more challenging things with our vehicles. We accept our mediocrity in driving, and we don't ever want to become better. There is something to be said about being competent for self-defense, but I think this is a skill that needs to be risen to the expert level, not just I'm competent with it.
Well, yeah, because the risk is, hurting the wrong person. And I mean, there are other significant risks, but in my mind, that one stands out, is that you would hurt the wrong person because of your incompetence. And also too, that you would make an emotional mistake because of a lack of ability to control your body. And I mean, we're going to have emotions when that happens, but I don't want that to overtake my physical capabilities because I wasn't ready to execute a set of skills in that moment. So, but he says, Gun Website says, and everybody is comfortable with that. No. And the answer is, yeah, we are comfortable with it. It's obvious because almost nobody actually does train up. And yet we all get on the road with each other and drive around knowing that everybody basically has a minimum level of skill when it comes to driving on the highway. So that's that. It's a simple concept, but actually I think in practice, it gets quite complicated really quickly. And I'm all for competence, but one of the ways that I make up for a lack of expert driving is that I just try to take less risks. And I drive more carefully in that I leave more room. I drive a little slower. I look a little further ahead because I know that I'm not, Dale Earnhardt or, Mario.
Bad example because
it's laziness. I'm being more careful because I'm lazy.
Oh, it wasn't. Yeah, Earnhardt Senior was the one that
died.
Died.
He's a bad example.
bad example. You should use Junior.
So
he knows how to crash.
So I think it actually in practice, it's worth interrogating this and asking a lot of questions about it. Because the more danger I recognize on the road, just the more careful I am about even ending up in that position, And this is funny because my brother is a pretty aggressive driver, but because of that, you're forced to develop a higher set of skills if you're going to do that. If you don't, you're going to crash. And he's never had an at-fault accident in his life.
Well, this is the beauty of learning the rules, right? And I'm not talking about gun rules. I'm just talking about rules, just in general, right? Like if I'm going to be a plumber, I need to know the rules of plumbing, the physics, and how water flows, and why P traps, and why if you have a fucking dishwasher, you have to loop the fucking hose up and all that shit, is just plain old physics. Once you understand all of the fucking rules, then you're like, oh, I can manipulate the stuff based off of these rules to work in my favor. I can manipulate the physics is still the physics. And this is where I was talking about, like, the gun. You can't change the way the fucking gun works. It works the way it works. Your body works the way it works, and all that shit. The best thing we can do is understand how all of the rules work, and then adapt it to, I don't have hands. Adapt that to,
I can't see very well.
I can't see very well. My dick's too fucking big. Like whatever, right? Like it's whatever limitation you might be under or could potentially be under. I'm sitting down. It's, again, you're not changing the gun training, but you understand the rules, and you're like, hey, how do we apply the rules to laying down?
Yeah.
How do we apply the rules to on my knees? How do I apply the rules to whatever? Some sort of limitation, but you know the rules. You understand physics. You understand the body's natural reactions.
Yeah, this goes back to that Musashi quote that I quoted, I don't know, a few months ago. Once you understand the way broadly, you see it in all things. So you learn the rules and you learn the landscape, and then really what you're really doing, I think, in all of that is just you're an efficiency machine. And some people are better than that at that than other people, but that comes down to mostly to like intelligence and experience. But we are basically efficiency machines, and we have a goal. We align our motivations to the goal, and sometimes we think we have a goal, but we don't really have a goal. Something else is our goal, and then we efficiently pursue that goal. And like I said, some people suck at that. They're just not really good at finding those efficiencies, but what they are good at, they will find the efficiencies in.
Correct.
And so, and then the more you know, the better you are at finding those efficiencies. And the reason I'm bringing up the efficiency is because that's a core principle in a fight, is to be efficient. And so that's why you learn the rules, you understand the principles and the concepts, and you learn the specifics, and then through practice and repetition and good training, you find those efficiencies and you get better at the skill.
Correct.
And yeah, by the way, these questions that he's asking, what do you think might be missing here? If you were explaining this to someone else, what would you need? Where did you get these? These are like some of the best questions I have ever read in my life.
So the next one, if you were explaining this to someone else, what would you do? I just brought this up in one of the videos that I did for the YouTubes, because I haven't been doing them, but I asked that question in a different way, and I have been more. I've done this more on purpose. So I've made sure that I ask this question when I ask, how do you choose a gun? And we have that conversation, and people start saying the dumb shit, right? It feels good. What the fuck does that mean? Comfort. What the fuck does that mean? And my question is, now I try my best to single out. I ask, who's a beginner who probably shot once, never bought a gun, never went shopping for a gun, and then boom, they raise their hand. I was like, cool. You just heard what other people are recommending in here. And I do this because that exercise is more valuable than somebody just spewing out fucking words.
Well, what you really need them to do is arrive at this understanding.
Correct. So I asked that person, cool, you just heard the recommendations from these people on what you need to know to buy a gun and how you choose a gun. What did you learn? And every single time, nothing, not a fucking thing. Like, exactly. Because saying feel, saying comfort, saying it fits doesn't fucking answer the question. You going and actually dissecting this, like you have to know what the fuck to look for. So that one, like if you were explaining it to a newbie, like what would you tell them, or how would you explain it to them? Is one thing that I use very often when we talk about how to choose guns in self-defense, and it brings up a really good exercise. One, it gets rid of the people who initially, oh, I know everything, I've done this before.
Yeah.
Cool, you've done it, but you don't know how
you
to
put their knowledge, or actually lack of knowledge, on the spot.
Correct.
By giving somebody else the chance to use it and realize it doesn't work.
Doesn't fucking work.
Yeah. So gun websites, these are good questions. I'm actually writing these down. I'm going to use these. Urban Arm says fake news. You're fake news. You're the Alex Jones of fake news now.
No. Urban Arm, it was saying fake news, I'm sure, to him being an aggressive driver.
Yeah.
But you also drive a Toyota Tacoma, which is like the ultimate fucking look at me truck. You're pulling around a kitchenette. You ain't that fucking cool, dude.
To answer Shelly's question, I'm going to answer it briefly because we did cover it earlier. But I'm going to answer it briefly. Tools like that are not good tools. Dry fire training, most of the time, is done incorrectly, including with the Mantis X. And it's definitely not worth the money that you would spend on it, unless your goal is to get really good at pulling the trigger on an unloaded gun. In that case, it's really good for that. But
Awesome.
That's not what I'm assuming that's not what you're trying to get good at.
So,
you're trying
Shelly,
to
I will say this, Shelly. Go to personaldefensenetwork.com, and there are videos about the Mantis X and their bearded dragon or dragon breath or whatever their AR version. And there is a very good video. I can't remember if I'm in it or not. But we do talk about when you can use the Mantis X, especially explicitly, in the proper way, in the proper context. So there's a breakdown on how to use that training mechanism appropriately for self-defense. Because most of what they do, and most of, like, if you look at their booklets, if you look at their training guides, if you go to their YouTube page, most of that is geared towards training for competitions. It's competitions. You're playing a game. In fact, there's a social aspect to the Mantis X where you compete with other people on the platform. It is literally designed for competition, but there is a way that you can turn that and make it beneficial for self-defense, understanding the limitations that the gun doesn't have recoil. Now, the Mantis X, I will say this, has a way for you to use it in a live fire way. So there is a way
to diagnose problems.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't really, it doesn't know what it doesn't know. Like if you've got no hands or no pinky or no, like, it doesn't know how to distinguish whether or not you have a fucking full set of fingers. And that might be the reason why it's going off a little bit. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know how to. You are a notorious shaker, period. Like, you're always
it's from riding around with Urban Armed all the time.
Yeah, there's amygdala hijacking.
Yeah.
There. You're just fucking constantly shaking.
I'm constantly in a trauma response.
So, like, for you, it would show that you're fucking up the entire thing, and like, you're not. That's just who you are. It's kind of like the cop that pulls you over and says you've got slurred speech, or I'm fucking Mexican and I'm having a hard time just saying English words to fucking begin with. Like, you don't know me. So that's a bit. Go to Personal Defense Network, look up Mantis, and there are some tips on how you can use it for self-defense. Overall, though, for most humans, dry firing in general is not recommended, just because it doesn't have the feedback that we think it does.
Yeah. I'll have to go watch that. By the way, Personal Defense Network has a website with training information, and you can subscribe and get more training information. But also, the YouTube channel has videos going back 14, 15 years now.
18 years.
Yeah.
So Personal Defense Network started off as a segment on, I think, the Outdoor Channel or something like that. And then the Outdoor Channel became very fucking, well, there's no real handgun training on the Outdoor Channel to really speak of. So the Outdoor Channel kind of didn't have that segment. And Michael Bain was a big part of that stuff, and a few other self-defense stuff. And then Personal Defense Network kind of separated and became part of a bigger conglomerate of Harley videos, like how to repair your shit. And so they have different aspects, and personal defense is one of them.
All right, so it's gotten to be a long episode, and lots of great questions. I think that's why it went longer. So I appreciate all of that a lot. Who is that? Art by FD. My spirit animal is a Chihuahua. I can't even argue with that. It's probably true. Just shaking all the time. Like, what's wrong with your dog? Nothing. It's a Chihuahua. I wanted to make a recommendation for any podcast listeners besides listening to this one, because you just mentioned the Outdoor Channel and going back in history and everything. Pincus recommended this podcast on one of his older podcast episodes, and it's a series on gangster capitalism. So that's the name of the podcast. It's Gangster Capitalism, and there is a series on the NRA, the downfall of the NRA. I think it's how many episodes? 8 episodes, actually 9 episodes. And this has nothing to do with training, but it does have to do with the gun industry. And I think it's incredibly insightful. So if you're interested in the background behind the NRA's money problems, go check out Gangster Capitalism, the NRA. So
since we're on the history stuff, Gun Websites he's been chiming in on the chat. He's done a really good job at doing this chronological thing for just about everything. He's got a wealth of information on the websites. I think Minuteman University, I think is part of his. So go check him out too. He does a lot of videos with Simon, which he runs 2A 4E, not to be confused with Guns for Everyone. We came first. I've never had a chat with him about this stuff. We came first. But it's 2A 4E. You guys can go check him out too as well. I think he's on Simon Says Train on the social media and shit like that. But
great organization. He is really committed to outreach and spreading that out to the community. So there you go. Gun Websites dropped the link. It's MinutemanUniversity.com. And I mean, that's gotta encompass thousands of hours of work that is in that Minuteman University website. It's phenomenal.
Correct.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. DiversityShoot.com is Simon's thing.
Yeah. Diversity Shoot. His whole premise is let's just get all kinds of people shooting. Let's not make this which I think in 2024, that's no longer a thing. Like nobody believes that guns are just for white people. I think legitimately and politicians, I think legitimately like in the 90s and the 80s and that not only was the thought, but that was for sure like exemplified everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Since I've gotten into guns in the early 2000s, I think 2007, 2008, whatever. I think you got into guns a little bit before I did, or maybe right around that same time.
Close enough, yeah, close enough.
And there has been a at least messaging shift for gun ownership being more diverse and all that stuff. So that was his whole idea with it. But it is getting gold, especially the one about Edgar. Edgar needs to be updated. I heard Rob Pincus University got hacked and leaked.
Josh said that Rob Pincus looks like Andrew Tate.
Andrew Taint.
Andrew Taint. Oh, that's good. That's funny. Rob Pincus is actually Andrew Tate's dad, so that's why they look so much alike. Yeah.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks for hanging out. If you guys want to sue the state of Colorado, we're still doing that. gunsforeveryone.com/legal-fund. It's on the website. You guys can see it there. gunsforeveryone.com.
Give $5, give $50, give $500, give $5,000. We need help to make this happen. People are donating, but we need a lot more people to donate.
Just to give you guys an understanding, we are suing 64 jurisdictions. And then slightly or after that, we're going to sue the state of Colorado. So it's going to be a big, long, drawn-out fight. We're fighting them in response to the new training requirements here in the state of Colorado. The state of Colorado changed their training requirements. One, it puts us as instructors in a really bad position because all of our, basically, they're breaking the law in having us go into a database that is available to the entire fucking world, including the Russians and the TikTokers, which is against the current law. So the law violates the law. And then obviously from a constitutional standpoint, the law itself doesn't hold any historical constitutional muster. So there's many reasons. We kind of have a few of them highlighted on the website if you guys want to go learn about that stuff. But gunsforeveryone.com/legal-fund. I hate to say it, but we need the fucking money. People ask us all the time, how come this person's not suing, or how come there's no lawsuit on that and there's no lawsuit on this? Money.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. Well, one, there needs to be a good legal foundation, and it's unconstitutional. Unfortunately, in 2024 is not a good legal foundation. So it's that it needs to hold legal weight. So it's not a frivolous lawsuit. And which we don't have that. We have a valid lawsuit, so we have to establish that ground, and then that it takes money. It unfortunately takes a lot of money. So if you guys can help us out, I appreciate it. But I appreciate the questions. I appreciate you guys being here. I appreciate you guys all the comments and all that shit. So we'll see you guys next time, sometime in the future.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Happy
Christmas.
Hanukkah.
Happy Edgar's birthday.
Oh, yeah, it is going to be my birthday. Yeah.